Your liver has been working without a single day off since the moment you were born. Every medication you've ever taken, every drink you've had, every processed food that went through your digestive system for the past 50 or 60 years, all of it landed on the same organ, which filtered it, neutralized it, and kept going. What most people don't know is that the liver doesn't need to be cleansed. What it needs, and what specific foods actually deliver, is something the research is far more precise about than any detox product you've ever seen advertised. 6 foods, documented mechanisms, real numbers from real studies. That's what this video is about. Here is a claim that appears on thousands of product labels, supplement websites, and wellness blogs, stated with complete confidence that your liver accumulates toxins over time and that periodic cleansing is necessary to remove them and restore proper function. It is not true. And the institutions that have examined this claim most carefully have said so with unusual directness. Johns Hopkins Medicine, one of the most respected medical institutions in the United States, states plainly in its patient education materials that liver cleanses lack strong clinical evidence and are unnecessary for a functioning liver. The National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, a branch of the National Institutes of Health, has reviewed the available research on detox diets and liver cleanses and reached the same conclusion. No reliable evidence supports the idea that commercial cleanses remove toxins from the body or improve liver health. The reason this matters, and why it's worth addressing directly before anything else, is that the liver detox industry is enormous. Americans spend billions of dollars annually on products built around the premise that their livers need periodic rescue from accumulated toxins. And the people buying those products are not unintelligent or gullible. They're responding to a narrative that feels intuitive. Of course, the body accumulates things over decades. Of course, an organ that processes everything you consume would benefit from periodic cleaning. Here's what the biology actually shows. Your liver performs its detoxification function continuously, not in cycles, not in seasons, but every moment of every day, through 2 enzymatic pathways called Phase 1 and Phase 2 detoxification. In Phase 1, enzymes called cytochrome P450s break down toxins, including alcohol, medications, and environmental compounds, into intermediate metabolites. In Phase 2, those intermediates are further processed and made water-soluble so they can be excreted through bile or urine. This is not a process that needs external assistance to initiate. It is running constantly, automatically, in the background of every other function your body performs. What the research has found is not that the liver needs help starting this process. It's that specific dietary inputs either support or undermine the efficiency of a process that's already running. Coffee doesn't trigger liver detoxification. It modifies the inflammatory environment in which liver cells are doing their work. Omega-3 fatty acids from fish don't flush out stored toxins. They reduce the rate at which fat accumulates in liver tissue, a process called hepatic steatosis, which is one of the primary drivers of liver disease in adults over 50. This distinction matters enormously because it changes what kind of support actually helps. If the liver needs periodic cleansing, then short-term interventions, a juice fast, a 7-day protocol, a concentrated herbal supplement, make intuitive sense. But if what the liver actually needs is a consistently supportive dietary environment to do a job it's already doing, then short-term interventions, followed by a return to the same diet, are essentially useless. The biology doesn't care that you did a cleanse last January. It cares about what's happening in its environment this week. The good news embedded in this correction is significant. You don't need a protocol, a product, or a dramatic intervention. You need a handful of specific foods, consumed consistently, that the research has shown to make a measurable difference in the health and function of a liver that is already right now working as hard as it can. Think of your liver like a factory that's been running 3 shifts a day for decades without a shutdown for maintenance. The machinery still works. The output is still produced. But the cumulative effect of continuous operation without the right inputs, the right lubricants, the right raw materials, the right conditions for the equipment to run efficiently, is that performance gradually degrades in ways that don't announce themselves until something goes wrong. The most common way something goes wrong in adult livers today is an infection or toxin overload. It's fat accumulation. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, now called metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease, or MASLD in updated clinical terminology, has become the most prevalent liver condition in adults in developed countries. Estimates suggest it affects between 25 and 40% of adults globally, with rates higher in people over 50, people with elevated blood sugar, and people with excess abdominal weight. It develops not because the liver has stopped working, but because the inputs it's receiving, primarily excess dietary sugar, refined carbohydrates, and saturated fat, are creating more fat than the liver can efficiently process, and that fat begins to accumulate within liver cells. Here's where the coffee research becomes one of the most compelling stories in liver medicine. A meta-analysis examining 16 independent studies, comparing more than 3,000 regular coffee drinkers to over 132,000 people who didn't drink coffee, found that coffee consumers had significantly lower rates of liver cirrhosis, with a pooled odds ratio of 0.61. An odds ratio below 1.0 means lower risk. An odds ratio of 0.61 means coffee drinkers were roughly 40% less likely to develop cirrhosis than non-drinkers, across 16 independent studies, conducted in different countries with different populations using different methodologies. The dose-response data, presented by researchers at a major gastroenterology conference and attributed to work from Duke University, added precision to that number. Drinking 2 to 3 cups of coffee daily was associated with a 38% lower risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, the most common form of liver cancer, and a 46% lower risk of death from chronic liver disease. At 4 or more cups daily, those figures increased to a 41% reduction in cancer risk and a 71% reduction in liver disease mortality. The mechanism involves multiple compounds. Cafestol and kawal, diterpenes in coffee, appear to enhance the activity of phase 2 liver detoxification enzymes. Chlorogenic acids in coffee have anti-inflammatory effects specifically in liver tissue. Caffeine itself appears to inhibit the production of connective tissue growth factor, a protein involved in liver fibrosis, the scarring process that precedes cirrhosis. Coffee isn't simply a stimulant that happens to correlate with liver health. It's a complex mixture of bioactive compounds that interact directly with the biology of liver cell function, inflammation, and fibrosis. This is the level of mechanism that separates the research on specific foods from the vague claims of liver cleanse products. The coffee data isn't observational correlation without a proposed explanation. It's observational data with a growing body of mechanistic research explaining step by step how the compounds in coffee interact with the cells and enzymes of the liver. The other 5 foods in this video work through similarly specific pathways, not through generalized detoxification. Through documented interactions with the biological processes that determine whether liver tissue stays healthy or begins to accumulate damage. Here's a pattern that repeats in a predictable cycle, and it's one that most people who care about their liver health have followed at least once. January arrives. The holidays are over. There's a particular kind of sluggishness, heavier than usual, slower than usual, that makes a reset feel genuinely necessary. Someone buys a liver cleanse kit. 7 days, green juices, herbal supplements, no alcohol, minimal processed food. They feel noticeably better by day 4 or 5. They attribute the improvement to the cleanse. They finish the protocol, feel good about themselves, and gradually return to their previous eating habits over the following weeks. 3 things happened in that scenario, and only one of them had anything to do with the liver. The first is that eliminating alcohol for 7 days reduced the inflammatory burden on liver tissue. Alcohol is directly hepatotoxic. It interferes with the liver's ability to metabolize fats normally and increases the production of reactive oxygen species that damage liver cells. 7 days without it gives liver tissue measurable relief. That's real. The second is that the reduction in processed food, refined carbohydrates, and added sugar during the cleanse week reduced the dietary fructose load on the liver. Fructose is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver, and excessive intake is one of the most well-documented drivers of hepatic fat accumulation. Removing it for a week reduces that accumulation temporarily. That's also real. The third, and this is the part that most people miss, is that neither of those improvements required the cleanse kit. They required the behavior changes that happened to coincide with using the cleanse kit. And more importantly, a 2023 analysis examining the 10 best-selling liver detox products on the market found no definitive evidence that any of those products improved liver function, and noted that supplement-induced liver injuries have been rising over the last decade, with several commercial detox products implicated in clinically documented cases of liver damage. The cleanse kit didn't help the liver. The absence of alcohol and excess sugar helped the liver. And the problem with the cleanse-based framing is that it locates the fix in the product rather than in the behavior, which means the behavior doesn't change, and the liver returns to the same environment it had before the protocol. What the research consistently shows is that liver health, like gut health, responds to the sustained dietary environment rather than to periodic interventions followed by a return to baseline. The coffee benefit that appears so dramatically in the meta-analysis data didn't come from drinking coffee for a week during a protocol. It appeared in people who were regular, consistent coffee drinkers over years. The fatty liver benefit from increasing dietary fiber appeared in people who maintained higher fiber intake over months, not in people who did a high-fiber week and resumed their previous diet. This reframes what liver support should actually mean in practice. Not an intervention, an environment. The consistent presence of specific dietary inputs that reduce the inflammatory burden, support the fat metabolizing capacity, and supply the compounds that liver tissue needs to maintain its own function. Not occasionally, but as the normal condition in which the liver is operating every day. 6 foods, each one with a specific mechanism. Each one chosen because the evidence goes beyond general health claims into documented interactions with liver biology. 1. Coffee. 2 to 3 cups daily, black or with minimal additions. The meta-analysis of 16 studies covering over 135,000 participants places this at the top of any evidence-based liver food list. The dose matters. The benefit appears with regular daily consumption, not occasional drinking, and the mechanism involves compounds, chlorogenic acids, cafestol, caweol, that interact specifically with liver cell function and fibrosis pathways. One important nuance: the research on liver protective coffee was conducted on black coffee, or coffee with minimal additives. A sweetened coffee drink adds back the very dietary sugar load that the coffee's compounds are partly working against. 2. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, or trout, 2 to 3 times per week. Omega-3 fatty acids from marine sources have a specific relationship with hepatic fat accumulation. Multiple clinical trials have shown that EPA and DHA, the 2 primary omega-3s found in fatty fish, reduce liver fat content, lower triglyceride levels, and decrease the inflammatory markers associated with fatty liver disease progression. The mechanism involves omega-3's role in regulating the genes that control fat synthesis and fat oxidation in liver cells, effectively shifting the balance toward less fat storage and more fat burning within liver tissue itself. 3. Leafy greens, spinach, arugula, kale, and similar vegetables. Daily. Leafy greens contain nitrates that the body converts to nitric oxide, a compound that supports healthy blood flow, including through the hepatic portal vein, the vessel that delivers everything absorbed by your intestines directly to your liver. They're also rich in folate, which participates in the methylation pathways involved in phase 2 liver detoxification. And their fiber content feeds the gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, which travel to the liver through the portal vein and have documented anti-inflammatory effects specifically in hepatic tissue. 4. Walnuts, a small handful daily. Among nuts, walnuts have the most liver-specific research. They're rich in arginine, which supports the liver's ability to neutralize ammonia, a byproduct of protein metabolism, and in glutathione precursors, which support one of the liver's primary antioxidant defense systems. A study published in the Journal of Hepatology found that increased walnut consumption was associated with improved liver enzyme levels in people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. 5. Whole grains, replacing refined carbohydrates at most meals. A cross-sectional study of more than 23,000 participants found that higher intake of insoluble fiber, the kind found in whole grains, oats, and legumes, was associated with a meaningfully lower risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The mechanism is partly direct. Fiber slows glucose absorption, reducing the post-meal blood sugar spikes that drive insulin secretion, which in turn drives hepatic fat production. And partly indirect, fiber feeds the gut microbiome, whose bacterial balance has an increasingly well-documented relationship with liver inflammation through the gut-liver axis. 6. Garlic, 2 to 3 cloves several times per week, raw or lightly cooked. Garlic, raw or lightly cooked. Garlic contains allicin and organosulfur compounds that have been shown in clinical research to reduce liver enzyme markers, specifically ALT and AST, the enzymes that elevate when liver cells are under stress. A randomized controlled trial published in the journal Advanced Biomedical Research found that garlic supplementation over 15 weeks significantly reduced liver fat index and improved liver enzyme levels compared to placebo in participants with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. None of these require a special protocol or a product. They require consistent presence: coffee most days, fatty fish several times a week, leafy greens daily, walnuts as a regular snack, whole grains replacing refined grains at most meals, and garlic incorporated into cooking several times a week. That pattern, maintained over months, is what the research was measuring when it found the protective associations it did. Here's the finding that changes how you should think about everything described in this video. And it's one that almost no liver health content addresses directly. The foods that do the most damage to liver health are consumed far more frequently and in far larger quantities than most people realize. And they're doing their damage during the same meals where you might be adding the protective foods from the previous block, effectively canceling out much of the benefit before it accumulates. Fructose is the clearest example. Added fructose, found in table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, sweetened beverages, fruit juices, and the majority of packaged foods, is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver. Unlike glucose, which is taken up by cells throughout the body and used for immediate energy, fructose bypasses those distribution systems and arrives directly in the liver, where it's converted to fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. Excessive fructose intake is now recognized in multiple gastroenterology guidelines as one of the two primary dietary drivers of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The other being excessive saturated fat. What this means practically is that eating sardines twice a week while drinking a can of soda daily creates a net liver environment that the sardines cannot overcome. The omega-3s in the fish are reducing hepatic fat through one pathway. The fructose from the soda is adding hepatic fat through another. The liver doesn't add up these inputs and give you credit for the good ones. It responds to the full environment simultaneously. The second major saboteur is alcohol. Not just at heavy drinking levels, but at what most people would describe as moderate social drinking. Alcohol is directly metabolized in the liver, and its breakdown product, acetaldehyde, is hepatotoxic. It damages liver cells and impairs the mitochondrial function that liver tissue depends on for energy. Research has shown that even moderate regular alcohol use, 2 to 3 drinks several times per week, increases liver enzyme markers and reduces the liver's ability to clear fat normally. And critically, regular alcohol use combined with early-stage fatty liver disease dramatically accelerates progression toward fibrosis and cirrhosis compared to fatty liver disease alone. There's a third factor that connects back to the gut research: the gut-liver axis. Your liver receives everything that your gut absorbs, not just nutrients, but also bacterial metabolites, endotoxins from gut bacteria, and short-chain fatty acids through the hepatic portal vein. When the gut microbiome is compromised by antibiotic use, low-fiber diets, or intestinal permeability, more bacterial endotoxins enter portal circulation and arrive at the liver, triggering inflammatory responses in hepatic tissue. This is one of the mechanisms through which gut health and liver health are biologically connected. A damaged gut environment produces a more inflammatory load for the liver to manage, on top of whatever the dietary inputs are delivering. The implication of all three factors together is the same conclusion the gut health research points toward. Supporting liver function is a net calculation, not an additive one. The 6 foods described in this video produce their documented benefits in liver environments where the primary saboteurs are being managed alongside them. Coffee reduces fibrosis risk, but coffee in an environment of daily soda, regular alcohol, and compromised gut health is working against a current the research never accounted for in its protective associations. The liver you're supporting isn't abstract. It's the organ that has processed every choice you've made for 50 or 60 years. The direction it moves from here depends on what you give it, consistently, every day. Starting now, consider what the coffee meta-analysis actually required to reach its conclusions. 16 independent studies, researchers in different countries, working with different populations, designing their studies independently, publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and finding, when their data was pooled, a consistent 40% reduction in cirrhosis risk among regular coffee drinkers. That level of replication across different methodologies, different geographies, different study populations is not common in nutrition research. Most dietary associations found in one study fail to replicate in others. The coffee-liver relationship has replicated so consistently that it has become one of the most cited examples of a robust dietary association in hepatology. What made that replication possible wasn't that everyone in those studies did a coffee protocol for a month. It was that they drank coffee regularly, as a daily habit, over years. The protective association is a product of sustained, consistent exposure to the compounds in coffee. Compounds that are doing something measurable in liver tissue every time the coffee is consumed. This is the pattern the research on liver health keeps finding. Protection that compounds over time, produced by inputs that are consistent rather than dramatic. Most people have never thought about their daily food choices in terms of what they're doing to their liver specifically. They think about heart health, about weight, about energy, about digestion. The liver doesn't announce itself with the same clarity that the heart does when something goes wrong, or that the gut does when something is off. Liver disease develops quietly, over years, without obvious symptoms until it's advanced enough to be serious. By the time elevated liver enzymes appear on a blood panel, the accumulation of damage has often been progressing for a decade. This is exactly why the conversation about liver health matters more before symptoms appear than after. The research on coffee, on omega-3s, on whole grain fiber, on garlic, none of it was designed for people with advanced liver disease. It was designed to understand what protects liver tissue in people who are still largely healthy before the damage compounds to the point of irreversibility. If what you've heard in this video represents a shift in how you think about your daily choices, not as quick fixes for a problem that's already visible, but as a consistent environment that either protects or slowly undermines an organ you've never had to think about, then this is exactly the kind of conversation this channel is built for. Most people will never hear their doctor explain the dose-response relationship between coffee and liver cirrhosis. Most people will complete a liver cleanse and feel temporarily better without understanding that the improvement came from the behavior change, not the product. Most people will reach their 60s and 70s without ever understanding that fatty liver disease had been developing silently for a decade, shaped by dietary inputs they never connected to this particular organ. That gap between what the research knows and what most people are told is what this channel closes. Follow along if you want to keep closing it. there's a great deal more ahead. Now, what remains is the question of where all this connects. Because the liver isn't isolated, it's part of a metabolic system that determines how your body manages blood sugar, cardiovascular risk, inflammation, and energy across every organ simultaneously. What you've just learned about liver health is one window into a much larger picture. The next video in this series opens another one. Come back to the beginning of this conversation. Your liver has been working without a single day off since the moment you were born. It hasn't asked for recognition. It hasn't announced when it's under stress. It has simply processed everything you've consumed for 50 or 60 years and kept going. Filtering, neutralizing, metabolizing, producing bile, storing glycogen, synthesizing proteins. A continuous operation of staggering complexity that most people never think about until a blood test shows elevated enzymes or a scan reveals early fatty changes. The liver cleanse industry exists because that reality creates anxiety. The idea that decades of accumulated inputs might have left a residue, a burden, something that needs to be cleared. That idea is intuitive and marketable, and almost entirely unsupported by the biology. Your liver doesn't work on a monthly clean-in schedule. It works on a continuous filtration model, and what it needs to do that work well is not an annual rescue. It's a daily environment that stops adding to the damage and starts supplying what the research has shown supports liver cell function. 6 foods, specific mechanisms, real numbers. Coffee, not as a cleansing agent, but because its chlorogenic acids and diterpenes interact directly with the enzymatic pathways involved in liver fibrosis and inflammation, producing a 40% reduction in cirrhosis risk across 16 independent studies. Fatty fish, not because omega-3s detoxify the liver, but because EPA and DHA shift the balance within liver cells toward fat oxidation and away from fat accumulation, the primary driver of the most prevalent liver condition in adults over 50. Leafy greens, not because they flush anything, but because their nitrates, folate, and fiber support the vascular, enzymatic, and microbial systems that the liver depends on upstream. Walnuts, because their arginine and glutathione precursors support the liver's own antioxidant defense and ammonia clearance. Whole grains, because their insoluble fiber reduces the post-meal insulin surges that drive hepatic fat production, while feeding the gut bacteria that reduce the inflammatory load arriving at the liver through portal circulation. Garlic, because its organosulfur compounds reduce liver enzyme markers in controlled clinical research, with sufficient rigor to have been published in peer-reviewed hepatology journals. Each one doing something specific. Each one working through a documented pathway. Each one producing its benefit not through a dramatic intervention, but through consistent daily presence in a liver environment that rewards consistency above everything else. This is the kind of information most people never get in a 15-minute appointment with a physician managing 12 conditions at once. It's the reason this channel exists, not to replace medical care, but to close the gap between what the research knows and what most people are told. If this conversation changed how you think about what you're putting into your body every day, not in terms of calories or weight, but in terms of what specific organs need to function well for the decades ahead, share it with someone over 50 who's still spending money on liver cleanse kits. They deserve to know what the research actually shows. Leave a comment with which of these 6 foods you're already eating regularly and which one surprised you most. That's how this channel learns what to keep building toward. Your liver has been working for you since before you were old enough to make any choices about what you consumed. Starting today, you can make choices that work back. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Always consult a healthcare professional.